August 17, 1943. A low sun casts long shadows across the Luftwaffe headquarters near Berlin. The air smells of oil and smoke. The distant drone of aircraft engines a persistent reminder of the war beyond these walls. Adolf Galland walks briskly through a room lined with maps and flight charts, the soles of his boots echoing on cold tiles. On the tables, intelligence reports are stacked neatly, each one a testament to the escalating threat posed by Allied air power. Outside, reconnaissance photographs show the unmistakable silhouettes of Lockheed P-38 Lightnings, their twin booms gleaming in the Italian sun. Galland stops at a large table, fingers tracing the flight paths of these long-range fighters. Every metric points to a looming danger: extended range, heavy armament, high-speed performance. He knows the Luftwaffe is stretched thin, pilots fatigued, aircraft in short supply, and that Germany cannot afford complacency. In the room, Hermann Göring leans back in his chair, dismissing the urgency in Galland's tone. "Impossible," he says, the word heavy with conviction. Galland studies his superior's expression, realizing the gulf between evidence and belief. The tension is palpable. Outside, the distant hum of P-38 engines grows louder, a harbinger of confrontation that will soon demand proof. Galland's warning is not a theory, it is a reckoning, and the world above Europe is about to validate it. By mid-1943, the momentum of the Second World War was shifting. On the Eastern Front, Soviet forces were pressing westward following the catastrophic defeat of the Wehrmacht at Stalingrad. In the south, Allied forces had successfully invaded Sicily in July, opening a new front that threatened to destabilize Axis control in Italy. Germany's strategic position was becoming increasingly precarious. Luftwaffe units were tasked with defending not only the Reich's industrial heartland but also extended theaters in Italy, France, and the Balkans. Resources were finite, and the margin for error was vanishing. The United States Army Air Forces had introduced a new variable into this equation: the Lockheed P-38 Lightning. This twin-engine fighter was unlike any German aircraft it faced. Its design combined exceptional speed with long-range capabilities, allowing it to escort heavy bombers deep into Axis territory and engage enemy fighters far from Allied bases. Reconnaissance photographs and intercepted communications had begun to reveal the scope of the threat. The P-38 could operate at altitudes and distances previously considered unattainable by Allied aircraft, challenging the Luftwaffe's existing defensive doctrine. Within the Luftwaffe command, the responsibility for interpreting these threats fell to a small cadre of experienced officers. Adolf Galland, a decorated ace and general of fighters, had spent years analyzing enemy capabilities and refining Luftwaffe tactics. Galland understood that the P-38 was not simply a faster or better armed fighter. It was a force multiplier. Its range allowed it to accompany bombers on missions that had previously been unprotected, exposing German airspace to new forms of attack. Fuel shortages and pilot attrition compounded the danger. Even the most skillful pilots could not maintain the necessary sortie rates to counter a weapon that extended beyond their reach. Reports filtered from units across southern Europe highlighted early encounters. Fighter wings in Italy noted that American aircraft were operating with an unprecedented operational radius. Pilots described the P-38 as a twin-fanged predator, able to strike and withdraw before conventional Luftwaffe interceptors could respond. The combination of speed, armament, and range meant that German pilots faced the prospect of engaging an enemy on unfavorable terms. Commanders had begun debating adjustments to formations, interception points, and fuel allocation, but these discussions were constrained by hierarchy. Orders and resources moved slowly, often lagging behind the evolving battlefield reality. The political dimension within the Luftwaffe hierarchy further complicated matters. Hermann Göring, Commander-in-Chief, maintained significant influence over operational decisions. Known for his charisma and rigid self-confidence, Göring often dismissed intelligence assessments that did not align with his perception of Luftwaffe dominance. His focus was on immediate morale and propaganda value, rather than technical or strategic accuracy. Galland's position, while respected for his combat experience, required him to navigate this environment carefully, Presenting intelligence that contradicted Göring's assumptions was a delicate task. A misstep could undermine both the message and the messenger. Galland's briefing on the P-38s in August 1943 was meticulously prepared. Flight logs, intelligence intercepts, and reconnaissance photographs formed the backbone of his argument. He emphasized that the P-38 was capable of escorting bombers on missions previously thought to be out of range, altering the risk calculus for Luftwaffe defenders. Each chart and statistic illustrated the stark reality: German air defenses were vulnerable, and immediate adaptation was necessary to avoid heavy losses. The warning was clear, but the reception was uncertain. Göring's dismissive response, categorically labeling the scenario impossible, set the stage for the confrontation between frontline intelligence and entrenched command belief. The stakes extended beyond tactical considerations. Allied momentum in the Mediterranean theater, combined with long-range fighter support, threatened to accelerate the collapse of German control in Italy and southern Europe. Galland's analysis was grounded in facts. If the Luftwaffe failed to adapt, attrition would accelerate, morale would deteriorate, and strategic options would narrow. This was not speculation, it was the assessment of an officer who had faced the consequences of underestimating enemy capability. Yet the gulf between insight and authority created a critical vulnerability. The tension in the Luftwaffe hierarchy mirrored the broader war environment. On one side, the Allies were innovating, leveraging technology and logistics to extend their reach. On the other, German command was constrained by ego, tradition, and resource limitations. Galland's warning was a focal point of this conflict, a clash between empirical reality and strategic hubris. The consequences would unfold in the skies over Europe, where speed, range, and pilot skill would determine outcomes in ways that paper and charts alone could predict. German technical intelligence had begun cataloguing the capabilities of the P-38 Lightning in precise detail. Twin Allison V17-10 engines provided a combined output exceeding 2,000 horsepower, giving the aircraft a top speed near 414 miles per hour at altitude. Its operational range, over 1,100 miles, allowed it to accompany B-17 and B-24 bombers on deep penetration missions, far beyond the reach of earlier Allied fighters. Armed with a concentrated, nose-mounted battery of one 20mm cannon and four 50-caliber machine guns, the P-38 could engage multiple targets with devastating accuracy. Unlike traditional single-engine fighters, it was stable at high altitude and maintained superior dive acceleration, allowing it to dictate engagements with German interceptors. Luftwaffe command recognized the potential threat, but was constrained by operational realities. Fuel shortages, maintenance bottlenecks, and pilot fatigue reduced sortie availability, particularly in secondary theaters like Italy and southern France. The Focke-Wulf FW-190 and Messerschmitt Bf-109, while formidable, lacked the combination of range and firepower necessary to consistently challenge escorted Allied bombers. Attempts to extend fighter coverage through forward basing or modified patrol patterns were limited by both infrastructure and Allied air interdiction. Galland understood that the P-38's range fundamentally altered the Luftwaffe's defensive calculations. Interception points that had previously been effective were no longer sufficient. Galland's intelligence briefing highlighted specific examples. Reconnaissance over southern Italy showed P-38 formations escorting bomber streams beyond 800 miles from their bases, far exceeding the reach of conventional German interceptors. German pilots had encountered these aircraft in both defensive and offensive engagements. One report detailed a single P-38 flight disrupting an entire Luftwaffe patrol, using superior speed and firepower to engage and disengage at will. Another documented how P-38s intercepted bombers over Naples, forcing German fighters into extended dogfights and heavy fuel consumption. These reports formed a consistent pattern. The Luftwaffe was being outmaneuvered in both range and tactical flexibility. Galland's approach was methodical. He presented performance comparisons between German fighters and the P-38, including climb rate, armament weight, and operational ceilings. He emphasized the necessity of adjusting Luftwaffe tactics, creating layered defense zones, altering patrol altitudes, and reconsidering deployment of veteran pilots. Each recommendation was grounded in empirical evidence and prior combat experience. The warning was clear: without adaptation, attrition rates would escalate, compromising both mission success and pilot survival. Göring's reception of this briefing exposed the divide between frontline intelligence and high command perception. He dismissed the analysis with a single word: impossible. The assertion reflected both disbelief and overconfidence in Luftwaffe's superiority. Göring's view ignored not only the technical data, but also the operational constraints facing German units. His focus remained on morale and symbolic displays of dominance rather than concrete adjustments. Galland, aware of the political and hierarchical limitations, pressed nonetheless, highlighting the potential consequences of inaction. The briefing illuminated broader strategic risks. Allied adoption of long-range fighter tactics was not a temporary anomaly. It represented a systematic evolution in air warfare. If the Luftwaffe failed to recognize this shift, the consequences would ripple across multiple theaters. Italian operations, supply routes in southern France, and even Reich airspace could become increasingly vulnerable. The contrast was stark: Allied technological and tactical innovation versus a German command structure resistant to adaptation. For Galland, the P-38 threat was not merely a tactical concern. It was emblematic of the changing nature of air power. The aircraft's combination of range, firepower, and speed forced a reconsideration of Luftwaffe doctrine, logistics, and pilot utilization. His warning was grounded in both analysis and experience. Ignoring it risked accelerating the decline of German air dominance. The tension between evidence and authority, between prediction and disbelief, would soon manifest in the skies over Europe, where theory would meet reality in irreversible ways. Adolf Galland's perspective was shaped by years at the forefront of aerial combat. As a fighter ace, he had experienced firsthand the margin between life and death in the skies. The P-38 Lightning represented a new threshold of threat, one that could render traditional Luftwaffe tactics insufficient. Galland understood the human cost of misjudging an enemy. Pilots would be exposed to superior aircraft at range, forced into engagements where reaction time was limited and escape options minimal. His warnings were rooted in concern for his men as much as strategic necessity. He anticipated the psychological strain of facing an enemy capable of striking before German fighters could intercept, and the toll this would take on pilot morale. Every briefing he prepared was intended to translate raw technical data into actionable understanding for command, linking numbers on a page to the survival of human lives in the air. From a tactical standpoint, the Luftwaffe's interception strategy was optimized for engagements within a limited radius. Fighters were stationed to protect industrial centers, supply lines, and critical infrastructure, relying on rapid response and concentrated formations to overwhelm enemy bombers. The arrival of long-range P-38s disrupted these assumptions. Their escort capabilities allowed bombers to penetrate previously defended airspace, undermining the concept of the bomber trap, where German fighters could strike unescorted targets with maximum efficiency. The Luftwaffe needed to reconsider altitude deployment, patrol distances, and coordination between units. Galland proposed layered interception strategies and staggered patrols to account for the extended reach of the P-38s, but these required precise timing and additional resources that were increasingly scarce. The tactical problem was clear: the P-38 shifted the battlefield outward, making defensive doctrine obsolete if unadjusted. Comparing aircraft capabilities clarified the challenge. The P-38's twin-engine design provided redundancy and sustained power, allowing it to perform high-speed maneuvers at altitudes where the Bf-109 and Fw-190 were less effective. Its concentrated nose armament enabled accurate, rapid strikes without requiring deflection shooting. German fighters, while agile and heavily armed, were limited in operational range and fuel endurance, restricting their ability to engage on the same terms. Galland's briefings included detailed performance metrics: climb rate, top speed at various altitudes, maneuverability in sustained turns, and ammunition capacity. Each metric demonstrated that the P-38 could dictate the terms of an engagement, striking from positions German pilots could not easily anticipate or counter. The technological asymmetry was subtle but decisive. It forced the Luftwaffe to confront the reality that their traditional advantages — pilot skill, tactical flexibility, could be insufficient against an aircraft that combined speed, firepower, and endurance in unprecedented ways. These angles, human, tactical, and technological, intersected in ways that transcended the immediate battlefield. Galland's concern was not abstract. It linked pilot survival, operational doctrine, and technological adaptation into a cohesive warning. Yet the challenge extended beyond data. Leadership and decision-making structures, allied intentions, and moral implications would all converge, defining the larger scope of the P-38 threat. The stage was set for deeper exploration of these dimensions in the next section. Hermann Göring's leadership style directly influenced how intelligence was received and acted upon. His authority was absolute within the Luftwaffe hierarchy, and his decisions often reflected personal ego as much as operational logic. Göring's dismissal of Galland's warnings as impossible was emblematic of a larger pattern: overconfidence in Luftwaffe supremacy, reliance on conventional doctrine, and a tendency to undervalue empirical intelligence. Galland faced the challenge of translating technical data into decisions that could penetrate this barrier of perception. Leadership failures were not merely abstract, they directly dictated resource allocation, pilot deployment, and strategic priorities. Göring's inability or unwillingness to acknowledge evolving threats magnified risk exposure, leaving German units vulnerable to technological and tactical innovations from the Allies. Enemy angle. From the Allied perspective, the P-38 was a deliberate instrument of strategic air superiority. The United States Army Air Forces, USAAF, recognized that long-range escorts could reduce bomber losses and extend operational reach into Axis territory. Pilots were trained to maximize the P-38's speed and altitude advantage, executing hit-and-run tactics that capitalized on Luftwaffe weaknesses. Intelligence gathering, including reconnaissance of German airfields and anti-aircraft patterns, informed precise mission planning. The P-38 was not an incidental presence. It represented a systematic recalibration of Allied air doctrine, shifting the balance of engagement in favor of sustained, deep-penetration bombing campaigns. Galland's warnings, therefore, were not warnings of hypothetical threats. They were alerts about enemy strategies already in motion. Moral angle. The human cost of ignoring Galland's analysis extended beyond pilot attrition. Luftwaffe crews faced increasingly dangerous missions with limited support, confronting the psychological burden of engaging an enemy operating on superior terms. Galland's concern for pilot safety was intertwined with operational ethics. Failures in recognition or adaptation would result in avoidable deaths, compounded by the futility of missions doomed from the outset. Leadership decisions in this context were moral acts as much as strategic ones. Dismissing credible intelligence translated into human consequences that could not be mitigated by skill or valor alone. The Luftwaffe's operational culture, emphasizing obedience over critical assessment, amplified these moral stakes, creating a scenario in which technical warnings collided with rigid command structures. Operational integration. The angles, leadership, enemy strategy, and moral responsibility intersected with tactical and technological considerations from the previous section. Luftwaffe pilots operated within a framework shaped by human decisions, enemy innovation, and aircraft limitations. Each factor compounded the risk of encountering P-38s in extended engagements. Command hesitation, overconfidence, and doctrinal inertia created gaps that the Allies could exploit systematically. Galland's warnings represented the synthesis of battlefield observation, empirical data, and human insight. Yet the organizational structure limited the translation of these warnings into actionable adaptation. Transition to climax. The convergence of these factors, human, tactical, technological, leadership, enemy, and moral, set the stage for the decisive confrontations in the skies. August 1943 would soon demonstrate the tangible consequences of underestimating the P-38 threat, where theoretical concerns became lethal reality. The Luftwaffe's capacity to respond, or fail to respond, would be tested in moments that left no room for disbelief. August 1943 brought the theoretical threat of the P-38 into stark reality. Luftwaffe units stationed across southern Italy and the Balkans began reporting encounters with American fighter formations that exceeded any previous experience. On August 18th, reconnaissance flights over Naples detected a flight of P-38 Lightnings escorting a group of B-17 bombers. German pilots scrambled, but the engagement unfolded contrary to all doctrine. The P-38s maintained altitude superiority, their twin engines enabling sustained speed even during prolonged dogfights. German interceptors, exhausted by extended patrols and limited by fuel endurance, struggled to reach effective engagement positions. Adolf Galland, monitoring these reports from command headquarters, realized that every warning he had issued was materializing. Unit after unit sent back similar accounts, P-38s attacking and disengaging on their own terms, preventing Luftwaffe fighters from reaching bomber formations before withdrawal. Tactical charts confirmed the aircraft's reach. Areas previously considered safe now lay within operational range. Fuel consumption calculations, previously theoretical, proved disastrous in real combat scenarios. German pilots found themselves over hostile territory, forced to fight with diminishing ammunition and compromised maneuverability. On August 19th, Luftwaffe Jagdgeschwader units engaged a P-38 escort in the skies above southern Italy. Pilot reports recorded multiple high-speed passes by the American fighters, precise bursts from concentrated nose armament, and rapid disengagement before the Luftwaffe could mount an effective counter. Losses were immediate, Bf-109s shot down, experienced pilots killed or wounded, aircraft lost due to fuel exhaustion. Galland's office received detailed sortie logs, each one confirming the same pattern. The P-38 dictated engagement on terms favorable to the USAAF, exposing weaknesses in Luftwaffe coverage and reaction time. Galland's attempts to communicate urgency to Göring intensified. He presented maps, sortie reports, and photographic evidence, emphasizing the direct correlation between the P-38's range and Luftwaffe attrition. Impossible was no longer a theoretical challenge, it was a lived reality in the airspace over southern Europe. Yet Göring's response remained dismissive, reflecting the disconnect between frontline experience and command perception. Every encounter confirmed the need for immediate tactical adaptation, layered patrols, revised interception points, and prudent allocation of veteran pilots. But such changes required authorization that was slow to arrive. The operational tempo of the Luftwaffe reached critical strain. Fuel shortages, maintenance bottlenecks, and pilot fatigue converged, leaving squadrons vulnerable during peak Allied bombing missions. August 20th saw repeated engagements over Naples and the Sicilian coastline. German units attempted to intercept a formation of P-38s escorting B-24 bombers. Despite concentrated efforts, pilots reported being outmaneuvered, outpaced, and forced into reactive positions. Damage assessments confirmed significant losses, both in aircraft and human lives. Galland's warnings had predicted precisely this scenario, a combination of extended reach, superior firepower, and operational flexibility overwhelming the Luftwaffe's defensive doctrine. The intensity of these encounters underscored the gap between perception and reality within Luftwaffe command. Tactical reports illustrated repeated patterns, P-38s engaging in precise, coordinated attacks, exploiting altitude and speed advantages, and disengaging before German fighters could effectively respond. Each loss reinforced Galland's argument, yet bureaucratic inertia and leadership overconfidence slowed implementation of corrective strategies. The human cost was immediate, visible in the faces of returning pilots, the twisted fuselages of Bf-109s, and the empty cockpits of fallen comrades. This sequence of events marked a turning point in air operations over southern Europe. The P-38 Lightning, previously considered a potential threat, had proven its operational efficacy. German pilots and commanders faced the undeniable reality that their traditional tactical doctrines were inadequate. Galland's intelligence, previously discounted, became a blueprint for understanding the new dynamics of aerial combat. The Luftwaffe's ability to project power was no longer a given. It was being systematically challenged by technological innovation and disciplined application of long-range air power. The following days amplified the severity of the Luftwaffe's dilemma. August 21, 1943, saw a coordinated Allied bombing mission targeting industrial infrastructure near Naples, escorted by a squadron of P-38 Lightnings. German interceptors, including veteran pilots, scrambled from multiple airfields, attempting to concentrate fire on the bomber stream. The P-38s, however, maintained altitude and speed superiority, executing defensive formations that allowed them to cover the bombers while minimizing exposure. Luftwaffe pilots engaged, but gunfire often fell short or missed entirely, and fuel constraints forced premature withdrawal. The mission concluded with substantial Luftwaffe losses, aircraft destroyed, pilots killed, and several severely injured, creating a ripple of operational disruption across units. Galland received cumulative after-action reports. Metrics confirmed a consistent pattern. In every engagement, the P-38s dictated the terms. Dive acceleration, sustained top speed, and firepower made them nearly untouchable under conventional Luftwaffe tactics. Pilots reported facing twin-engine fighters capable of attacking from altitudes previously considered safe and retreating before German units could mount an effective response. Each loss reinforced the validity of Galland's earlier warnings, the impossible scenario, now a manifest operational reality. Göring's perception of the Luftwaffe's dominance began to strain under the weight of these reports. Despite repeated evidence, the command structure was slow to adapt. Orders were issued to reinforce frontline units and extend patrol patterns, but logistical constraints limited effectiveness. Aircraft were cannibalized for parts, fuel allocations stretched thin, and replacement pilots were hurriedly trained to fill gaps left by casualties. The human cost of delayed adaptation was acute. Veteran pilots faced relentless sorties, their experience invaluable yet insufficient to counter the systematic advantages of long-range escorts. The consequences of underestimating the P-38 extended beyond immediate losses. Operational planning had to be revised mid-mission, forcing commanders to make high-stakes decisions in real time. Tactical doctrine, once reliant on predictable bomber paths and localized interception, became obsolete. Galland emphasized the need for layered defenses and coordinated response networks, but implementation lagged behind operational necessity. Each sortie was a test of endurance, skill, and adaptability, and each engagement highlighted the Luftwaffe's strategic vulnerability. By the end of August, the broader picture was undeniable. The P-38 Lightning had reshaped the aerial landscape over southern Europe. German pilots, previously confident in their ability to intercept and destroy Allied formations, were now forced to contend with an aircraft that combined speed, firepower, and operational range in ways they could not match consistently. Galland's warnings had been vindicated, but only at the cost of numerous lives and aircraft. The Luftwaffe's response remained constrained by hierarchy, resource scarcity, and entrenched assumptions about air superiority. The climactic encounters of August 1943 marked a turning point not just tactically, but psychologically. German pilots faced a sobering reality. Technical skill and courage alone were insufficient against evolving enemy capabilities. Leadership decisions, or failures thereof, directly translated into operational outcomes. The Luftwaffe had encountered a paradigm shift in air warfare, one that demanded rapid adaptation, technological evaluation, and strategic humility. Galland's foresight had predicted this shift, but the human and organizational factors delayed effective response. As September approached, the consequences extended beyond Italy. Allied air power, supported by long-range fighters, threatened to penetrate deeper into Axis-held Europe, challenging German air dominance across multiple theaters. The P-38 Lightning had not only demonstrated its tactical efficacy, but had revealed the structural limitations of the Luftwaffe. The stage was set for the aftermath, a period of attrition, doctrinal re-evaluation, and the human cost of underestimating both technology and intelligence. The immediate aftermath of August 1943 exposed the Luftwaffe's vulnerability to long-range Allied fighters. Loss reports from southern Italy and the Balkans revealed a sharp increase in aircraft destroyed and pilots killed or wounded. Within 2 weeks, multiple Jagdgeschwader units reported attrition rates approaching unsustainable levels. Experienced pilots were lost at a pace that replacement training could not match, leaving younger, less seasoned aviators to confront increasingly sophisticated enemy aircraft. Operational readiness declined, with fewer aircraft available for interception at critical times, amplifying the effectiveness of Allied bombing campaigns. The Luftwaffe command attempted remedial measures. Orders were issued to stagger patrol rotations, prioritize veteran pilots for key missions, and extend radar coverage along vulnerable routes. However, these adjustments were reactive, constrained by the logistical realities of fuel shortages, maintenance backlogs, and limited aircraft numbers. Forward airfields lacked sufficient infrastructure to support extended sorties, and the tempo of Allied operations left little opportunity for recovery. Tactical manuals were updated to address encounters with twin-engine long-range fighters, yet implementation varied widely between units, further diminishing coordinated response. Galland's standing within the Luftwaffe evolved in parallel. His warnings, once dismissed, now commanded attention. Pilots recognized the prescience of his analyses, and junior officers increasingly consulted him for tactical guidance. Nevertheless, political dynamics remained complex. Göring's initial dismissal and subsequent reluctant acknowledgement of the threat created friction at the highest levels. Galland's credibility as a strategist was validated, but his influence over immediate operational decisions remained limited by hierarchical constraints. The paradox of foresight against bureaucratic inertia became a defining feature of Luftwaffe operations in the late summer of 1943. The strategic implications extended beyond attrition statistics. Allied bomber missions, now effectively escorted by P-38 Lightnings, encountered less unopposed resistance, allowing sustained disruption of Axis supply lines and industrial output. Italian operations, already strained, faced mounting logistical challenges as air superiority in contested zones became increasingly contested. Reports from intelligence units indicated that German defensive doctrine had yet to catch up with evolving Allied tactics, underscoring the urgency of adaptation that had initially motivated Galland's warnings. Human factors were equally significant. Pilots returning from encounters with P-38s described engagements as disorienting and exhausting. The combination of speed, altitude, and firepower forced German fighters into reactive postures, increasing psychological strain. Combat fatigue rose sharply, contributing to higher error rates and exacerbating losses. Galland's concern for pilot welfare, long an element of his operational approach, became a critical consideration as survival rates increasingly reflected the effectiveness of Allied technology, rather than individual skill alone. The broader consequence of these engagements was an undeniable recalibration of German air strategy. The Luftwaffe's tactical limitations, previously mitigated by local superiority and aggressive maneuvering, were exposed by long-range escorts that could strike and disengage at will. Command decisions, previously abstract in their strategic implications, now directly translated into operational outcomes and human cost. Galland's warnings, once theoretical, had manifested in tangible results: aircraft lost, pilots dead or injured, and the momentum of Allied operations consolidated in favor of sustained strategic bombing campaigns. The broader consequences of the P-38's operational success became increasingly apparent across multiple theaters. Allied commanders recognized that long-range fighter escorts could fundamentally alter air campaign outcomes, enabling deeper penetration into Axis territory with reduced bomber losses. Mission reports indicated that B-17 and B-24 formations, when accompanied by P-38s, suffered significantly fewer casualties, allowing for sustained pressure on industrial and military targets. German defensive planning, reliant on predictable bomber routes and interception points, was rendered increasingly ineffective. Luftwaffe doctrine faced mounting challenges. Tactical manuals were revised to emphasize high-altitude patrols, staggered interceptions, and concentrated use of veteran pilots. However, logistical constraints limited implementation. Fuel shortages, maintenance bottlenecks, and pilot attrition remained persistent obstacles. Units deployed in Italy and southern France were forced to conduct engagements under suboptimal conditions, frequently encountering P-38s before they could establish favorable attack vectors. Reports from August and September 1943 detailed repeated scenarios in which German fighters were forced into defensive maneuvers, their performance dictated by the superior range and firepower of the P-38. Galland's influence persisted, though his authority remained circumscribed by hierarchical politics. His analyses were increasingly cited in tactical briefings, and pilots relied on his guidance for anticipating P-38 behavior in combat. Yet, systemic limitations prevented comprehensive adaptation. the Luftwaffe faced an operational paradox. Even when awareness of the threat existed at the highest tactical levels, structural and logistical factors constrained execution. The P-38 Lightning had not only demonstrated superiority in direct engagements, but had exposed vulnerabilities within German command, logistics and doctrine that could not be remedied instantaneously. The human dimension of these outcomes was stark. Experienced pilots, witnessing the lethal efficacy of the P-38, experienced heightened stress and fatigue. Replacements, less seasoned and often hastily trained, were thrust into encounters where survival depended as much on circumstance as skill. Casualty reports from August and September documented rising fatalities and aircraft losses, underscoring the tangible cost of underestimating technological evolution and the operational necessity of rapid adaptation. Morale was affected both by the technological mismatch and by the perception of command indecision, creating an atmosphere of strain that compounded the tactical challenge. Strategically, the P-38's introduction and the Luftwaffe's delayed response accelerated Allied momentum in southern Europe. The combined effect of sustained bombing campaigns and long-range fighter support disrupted supply lines, weakened defensive positions, and undermined Axis operational cohesion. Italian cities, ports, and industrial centers increasingly fell within effective Allied reach, forcing German commanders to commit limited resources across a wider operational spectrum. Galland's foresight had been validated. The P-38 threat had shifted not only individual engagements, but also the trajectory of regional air operations, emphasizing the decisive interplay between technology, doctrine, and leadership. The events of late summer 1943 left the Luftwaffe with an immutable lesson. Failure to anticipate and integrate responses to evolving enemy capabilities carries immediate operational, human, and strategic consequences. Galland's warnings, once ignored, had become the blueprint for understanding and adapting to a transformed aerial battlefield. The P-38 Lightning had not merely altered tactics, it had exposed systemic vulnerabilities that would reverberate through subsequent campaigns. The episode of August 1943 underscores a fundamental truth in warfare. Technological evolution can render established doctrine obsolete almost overnight. The P-38 Lightning, with its combination of speed, range, and firepower, challenged not only the Luftwaffe's tactical assumptions, but also the perception of invulnerability that pervaded German command. Galland's warnings were rooted in empirical observation and strategic foresight, yet they collided with hierarchical rigidity and overconfidence. The human cost of this disconnect was immediate and measurable. Aircraft lost, experienced pilots killed, and operational momentum ceded to the Allies. Galland's role exemplifies the intersection of expertise and foresight in a system resistant to change. He navigated the dual pressures of battlefield reality and political oversight, translating technical data into actionable intelligence while contending with disbelief at the highest levels. His experience illustrates the limits of command when evidence challenges authority. Foresight alone cannot prevent losses if structures fail to respond. The P-38's operational debut over Europe became a crucible for this tension, demonstrating that innovation can outpace even the most disciplined forces when organizational adaptation lags. Beyond tactical and technological dimensions, the events carry enduring lessons about human judgment under uncertainty. Leadership decisions, particularly those dismissing credible intelligence, have consequences that extend far beyond the immediate battlefield. Morale, pilot survivability, and the broader trajectory of campaigns are shaped as much by perception and responsiveness as by raw skill. The Luftwaffe's encounters with the P-38 illuminated the cost of inflexibility, a capable force rendered vulnerable by delayed recognition of change. In historical perspective, the confrontation with the P-38 foreshadowed the broader evolution of air warfare. Long-range, highly capable aircraft would increasingly dominate operational planning, requiring rapid adaptation and integration of intelligence into doctrine. The lesson is not merely technological but philosophical. Success in conflict demands constant reassessment of assumptions, acknowledgement of emerging threats, and the courage to act decisively when confronted with evidence that challenges established belief. The skies over Europe in August 1943 were more than a battlefield. They were a proving ground for the limits of perception, leadership, and adaptation in war. This realization, hard-earned through loss and observation, resonates beyond the era. The capacity to perceive, interpret, and respond to evolving realities remains a decisive factor in the outcomes of conflict.